What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at Week 3 of the NFL season. And we have a 12-game slate here on DraftKings, 13 games over on FanDuel because it does include the Sunday night football game this week between the Chiefs and the Falcons. So what I'll do is I'll go through the top DraftKings plays, then I'll hop over to FanDuel. I'll look at what we want to consider from that primetime game as well. Normal agenda of the show, I like to go over my favorite play for all lineups on this slate. Then I like to look at the biggest favorites in betting markets as far as spreads are concerned, because usually that's a pretty good indicator of other running backs that might be in some positive game script opportunities. Thankfully, this week we actually have one player that meets both criteria. That is San Francisco's Jordan Mason once again here against the Los Angeles Rams in LA on Sunday afternoon. We have news now that Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are either out or extremely likely to be out in the case of Kittle, which means this offense is going to be really condensed and run through Mason, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings. We're going to really have a lot of opportunity here, I think, to capitalize on Jordan Mason continuing to see a ton of volume in the running game against the Rams this week. Matchup couldn't be more pristine for Mason. The 49ers have the fourth best run blocking offensive line on the season thus far by adjusted line yards, and the Rams have the fourth worst rush defense on the season. So not only are we expecting another big workload for Mason here, we're expecting another efficient day at just $6,200 here on DraftKings. A little bit more expensive over on FanDuel. He's $8,300 this week. Once again, he is the number one running back play in our model, so we definitely want to make sure we find ways to get to him on FanDuel despite the higher price tag. San Francisco favored by 6.5 points in this game against the Rams. Other big favorites, we have the Cleveland Browns favored by 6.5 points against the New York Giants this week, so that means we should be interested in Jerome Ford here. Ford has been the primary tailback, although we were a little disappointed by his work last week against Jacksonville. The New York Giants are a slightly below average rush defense this year, also slightly below average defending running backs in the passing game. So would like to see Ford's volume get a little bit closer in the passing game to what it was in week 1 against Dallas, but that also was a trailing game script. So we're not expecting a trailing game script here. I think Jerome Ford is tournament only, but hard to argue with the anticipated script there. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are favored by 6.5 points in their matchup at home against the Denver Broncos this week, and Rachaad White was cleared from the injury report, so he's going to be a full go here in week number 3. We've seen it for the last 2+ years now with Rachaad White. He should, in a positive game script, see 10 to 15 touches on the ground, 3 to 5 targets in the passing game. A little bit of a bad run out last week against the Lions for Rachaad White, but we expect a little bit of a better result here against the Denver Broncos. Tampa Bay actually has the third worst run blocking offensive line on the season, so that could explain a little bit of Rachaad White's inefficiency. Despite the big favorite status of the Bucs here, I think people are on the passing game here with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, so Rachaad White, probably some good leverage off of that in tournaments. The Raiders are favored by 6 points against the new look Carolina Panthers, I guess. The Panthers making the switch to Andy Dalton this week and benching Bryce Young. Zamir White going to be, I think, the best player to consider here in the backfield for tournaments. Zamir White's offensive line is an issue. The Raiders have the 5th worst run blocking offensive line on the season, but the Panthers are an easy matchup for this backfield. Finally, as far as favorites are concerned, we have the Seattle Seahawks favored by 4.5 points against the Miami Dolphins, sans Tua Tagovailoa. Kenneth Walker is not going to play this week, so we're going to get another Zach Charbonnet heavy workload. Very inefficient day against the Patriots in week 2. We're expecting a much better run out here in week number 3 against the Dolphins. Dolphins are a below average rush defense, and they are the worst defense in the NFL defending running backs in the passing game on the short season. So Charbonnet basically got every single opportunity for Seattle at running back last week. So we're expecting that again here. Charbonnet, definitely a player people are going to be playing in low risk this week as a result. Mason and Charbonnet are your big plays from the favorites for low risk contests for all contest types. The other plays that are going to be popular this week, the other side of this Miami-Seattle game. Devin Achane is also going to be popular this week despite Miami being an underdog. He's got a heavy involvement in the passing game in this offense, was targeted 4 times by Skylar Thompson when he relieved Tua after his injury in week 2. So we're not expecting any change to Achan's volume in the passing game. We're not expecting any change to his playing time or his volume in the running game. Once again, we are also expecting Raheem Mostert to be out here in week 3 like he was in week 2. So Achan definitely in line to have a ton of work. And in a trailing game script, Achan also retains a pretty high ceiling at this passing volume. So I actually think he's a really, really strong play. Miami and Seattle, one of my favorite plays for tournaments this week. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Other running back, though, that the field is going to have to reckon with this week is Cam Akers, now with the Houston Texans, a player we probably didn't talk about whatsoever all summer in the lead up to the season. But the issue is that Joe Mixon is doubtful after his high ankle injury, didn't practice all week. So I would say this doubtful tag is more likely an out tag than anything else. Dameon Pierce also out, already ruled out with his hamstring injury. Cam Akers practiced with the first team all week in preparation for this game against the Vikings. He's just $4,700 here on DraftKings. Now, there is some concern that he's only going to be playing on early downs and that Dare Ogunbowale will mix in on passing downs for the Houston Texans. But if this is a positive game script for Houston against Minnesota, Akers probably a pretty heavy bet to get a rushing touchdown there near the goal line. All you're going to need at this price is like 10 to 15 points to justify fitting him in your lineups. And at like 30% expected ownership, Cam Akers becomes more of a consideration as a, do I just block the field and figure out what else I can do with my lineup, than actually like what he does when you play Cam Akers. So I think Cam Akers makes a ton of sense in low risk. I think there's arguments to fading him in tournaments that I'm open to because there's a lot of good plays this week. But just understand that Cam Akers is definitely going to be part of that low risk core this week. The other running back that's going to be popular, I mean, come on, it's the Saints. They have been absolutely absurd through the first 2 weeks of the season. No, we're not expecting another 4 touchdowns from Alvin Kamara this week, but just understand Kamara is going to be very popular in a high total game against the Eagles at home for the New Orleans Saints here in week number 3 as well. Highest totals this week, Detroit and Arizona are at 51.5 points in betting markets. New Orleans and Philadelphia are at 49.5 points. Baltimore and Dallas are at 47.5 points. And for tournaments, I actually think Baltimore and Dallas, Miami and Seattle, and Philadelphia and New Orleans are the best games to consider stacking this week. So those are the games that were highlighted in the Occupy Fantasy Daily plug last night when we released that. Those are the games that I'm looking to build out of primarily for my tournament lineups. As far as low-risk quarterbacks are concerned, each of the dual threat quarterbacks from the Philadelphia and Baltimore games are on the table this week. They're going to be some of the most popular plays on the board. That, of course, is Lamar Jackson with the Ravens on the road against the Dallas Cowboys, and Jalen Hurts on the road against the New Orleans Saints here in week number 3. They're each in similar situations this week. Hurts and Jackson each have top 10 pass blocking offensive lines this year, but they actually have really tough matchups. New Orleans has been the 4th best pass defense on the young season. The Cowboys have actually been the 7th best pass defense on the young season. So each of these guys may have to rely on their legs to produce here for our lineups this week. I think where the field is going to go is actually a little bit further down the table to the mid-range salary tier. It seems like Geno Smith, with the Seattle Seahawks being the favored side here against Miami, is going to catch the most ownership this week. We project him to be the highest owned quarterback in tournaments in the Occupy model this week, and I think he'll be the highest owned quarterback in low-risk contests as well. There's a pretty good reason for that because Seattle's matchup pretty clean here. Seattle is basically league average as a pass-blocking offensive line, but the Dolphins have the 3rd worst pass defense in the NFL. We're expecting Geno to be able to drop back and carve up the Dolphins secondary this week with Metcalf, with JSN, with Tyler Lockett. Lockett being more of a tournament play this week after not getting a lot of volume last week. We saw what Geno did in overtime against the Patriots last week, who were, I think, a significantly tougher pass defense in general for him to play against than Miami has been on the young season. So I do think playing Geno in low-risk contests, but also in high-risk contests, a great play this week. Just understand it's going to be extremely, extremely popular to play Seattle in tournaments because it's the cash lineup that everyone is looking for this week. So we're going to get Geno in our lineup. We're going to get Charbonnet. We're already one player away from getting a 3-man Seattle stack. There are some Miami tournament plays that we can consider that I'll talk about here in a little bit after we finish the low-risk lineup. With wide receivers this week, at least as far as low risk is concerned, it seems like the field is going to live in this medium tier of pricing. So I'm going to call that between like $5,000 and upper $6,000 here on DraftKings. The most obvious candidate I think the field will be considering to pair with Smith in both tournaments and low risk lineups is, of course, DK Metcalf after his massive 14 target day against the Patriots last week. We're projecting him to be significantly more popular than JSN, even though he had a big target day last week as well out of the slot for the Seahawks. The most popular plays for low risk contests: Brandon Ayuk, no Deebo Samuel, no George Kittle. Jordan Mason doesn't catch passes. Jawan Jennings is kind of boxed into his typical role in this offense. I think that means the passing volume is going to flow through Brandon Ayuk here in week number 3. And I have no problem playing him with Jordan Mason in low-risk lineups. Brock Purdy actually does lead the NFL in passing yardage through 2 weeks of play, so we are expecting San Francisco to continue to be pretty efficient. And now the best option for Purdy to throw to is going to be Ayuk here against the Los Angeles Rams. So you'll see him in a lot of low-risk lineups. In a similar situation with A.J. Brown still sidelined this week, Devonta Smith is also going to be very popular this week at $6,900. Devontae Smith is another option in low-risk contests this week I think the field will be on. Chris Godwin with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has been extremely productive, 8 targets in each of the first 2 games of the season. He's also, I think, very low-risk viable, expected to be popular this week. Chris Olave with New Orleans, going to be popular in tournaments that may carry over to low-risk contests at this price tag, although I think he gets squeezed out of the low-risk build by some of these guys that I've talked about already. Certainly has access to a very high ceiling. Olave has not found the end zone yet, but still running a lot of routes for the Saints here. And then finally, the player who is running a lot of routes, who is seeing targets on 70% of his routes, at least he did last week, was in the winning Millionaire Maker lineups. As a result, Malik Nabers, the rookie stud wide receiver for the New York Giants. New York, the underdog side against Cleveland this week, so they'll be chasing points again, which means the passing volume from Daniel Jones to Malik Nabers probably comes along once again here in week number 3. So I think Malik Nabers is another good play for low-risk contests. As a little bit of cap relief, I think the most popular cheap play we'll see the field consider is Elijah Moore. We've seen 6 and 8 targets over the first 2 weeks of the season, respectively. The role with the Browns pretty strong for Elijah Moore in this offense. So if we're really struggling to fit what we want in low-risk contests this week, I think Elijah Moore probably the best punt at receiver here as a result. At tight end, I think the field is going to be paying up for the elite options this week. We saw Brock Bowers have a really big day against the Ravens in the Raiders' comeback win last week in week number 2. Caught all 9 of his targets for 98 yards. We're expecting Bowers to continue to see a ton of volume from Gardner Minshew in this offense. And even though his prices come up a little bit to $5,400 here on DraftKings, we still want to play him, I think, in low-risk contests as the primary tight end to build with here. We got $4,800 per player remaining for a low-risk build here. I do think the other tight end you'll see people go for if they can make it work is Trey McBride here against the Detroit Lions. Get a piece of that high total game here between Detroit and Arizona. Seems to be the safest investment as far as floor is concerned in Arizona's offense with Kyler Murray out of the tight end position. So these are the best plays, I think, for low risk at receiver, at tight end. Me personally, out of the receivers that I discussed, my favorite in that group is Malik Nabers. That leaves us with $3,200 to finish out the lineup. And I can tell you that some of our favorite plays at defense this week would both fit a low-risk build. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are our top defense in the model this week. And then we have the Tennessee Titans, who we're still at this point expecting to get a start against Malik Willis for the Green Bay Packers, with Jordan Love questionable to return here in week 3 after his injury in week number 1. So plenty of ways to make the lineup fit this week. But there's no one really paying up for these stud receivers, right? And that creates a lot of opportunity, I would say, in tournaments. When I say stud, I'm talking about these guys priced $7,000 and above, $8,000 and above. Of course, that this week, that's CeeDee Lamb. Baltimore and Dallas, one of my favorite games to stack. He's not going to be super popular this week. Justin Jefferson with Minnesota, also not going to be tremendously popular this week. Tyreek Hill with the Miami Dolphins is going to be under 5% owned in contests on DraftKings and FanDuel this week. We're expecting Miami to be trailing. We're expecting Skylar Thompson to be throwing, therefore, and Tyreek Hill is still the primary asset in this passing attack. I have to believe Miami is going to try to manufacture touches for Tyreek Hill and Waddle based off of their speed here. and nobody's going to be playing these guys. So that's a big reason why I think Miami and Seattle is one of the better games to stack this week. You can certainly do it through the more popular Devin Achane play at running back and sacrifice one of the three popular spots for low-risk contests with Akers, Mason, and Charbonnet and get at it that way. But I also think like a 1% owned Tyreek Hill in tournaments also a really, really strong play. Other high-end receiver here, Amon-Ra St. Brown finally saw the volume in week 2. Jared Goff dropped back to pass like 50 times, 50, 60, 55 times, I think, something like that last week. St. Brown, 19 targets against the Bucs. We're expecting similar things here. Maybe not 19, but similar high volume against Arizona, with this being the highest total game on the board. So Amon-Ra St. Brown also not projected to be very popular. Looking over at the wide receivers in the Occupy model, look some of the guys that I just mentioned on the main slate here. Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins. Also, you see him ranked as a top play for us, going to be in that 15 to 20% range on DraftKings and FanDuel just because the salary is a little lower. But Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, all these guys projected to be 10% or lower on DraftKings and FanDuel. So I think that's a great way to get different this week, is to consider stacks that include those guys. They're not going to be very, very popular ways to build here in week number 3. Talked about how FanDuel includes the Chiefs and the Falcons game. In your low-risk lineup over there, I do think Rashee Rice at wide receiver is a strong play at just $7,300. I think you can still get to our top defenses and have plenty of money to play another receiver as well. Again, Cam Akers, $4,000. That really frees it up and lets you do whatever you want here over on FanDuel. But if I'm picking one play from the Kansas City and Atlanta game that I think makes sense to include in your low-risk lineup, specifically over on FanDuel, it's got to be Rashee Rice with the Chiefs. Kansas City, probably a good offense to stack over there on FanDuel this week. They have the 4th highest implied team total of the day on Sunday. So they're also a good play, strictly for you FanDuel players here. Tournament lineup, the most popular way I think people are going to make this work, sacrifice Akers, get Devin Achane in here, play DK Metcalf, 4,500 per player remaining. We can play like Bucs defense. I got 5,250 per player remaining for 2 wide receivers. I can use a salary cap space reliever like an Elijah Moore and then play a little bit more expensive receiver if I want, or I can grab 2 of these guys in this high 4s, low 5s in price range. And I think there are some opportunities here. We're only 2 weeks into the season, so we don't have a formal underperforming wide receiver list. But looking at air yards, target share, and expected fantasy points for a couple of guys, there are some other tournament plays here that I think are still viable that are extremely undervalued. Cortland Sutton with Denver, $5,400 here on DraftKings, has 15 targets on the season, has an expected fantasy points number of about 36 fantasy points, but only has 11 PPR points. So to me, through 2 weeks of play at least, the biggest underperforming wide receiver in the NFL is Cortland Sutton, and I think he becomes a tournament play worth considering. We also have Amari Cooper with the Cleveland Browns, who has seen a ton of opportunity, also 15 targets, expected to have 32 fantasy points through the first 2 weeks of the season. He has just 7.7. You see there on the screen, he has 9 and 8 targets in each of the first 2 games, but a really, really pathetic amount of receiving yardage in this offense. That's definitely going to regress at some point. Cooper not going to be popular in this New York Giants and Cleveland Browns game. A little bit more expensive than Sutton, but also a decent tournament play, I would say, based off of expected opportunity. Here's where the field is probably going to be a little bit more on. We have at $5,200 Tank Dell in this Houston Texans offense. We've seen, 1 reception for -3 yards on 4 targets. You can't underperform more than that, I suppose. But you have manufactured touches in the running game for Dell, 5 rush attempts through the first 2 weeks of the season. And he has 26 expected receiving fantasy points on the season, but just 7.7 fantasy points through the air, just like Amari Cooper through the first 2 weeks of the season. So Tank Dell underperforming by about 20 fantasy points on the year. Another opportunity to get into your lineups. Some other names that are also on this list, Deontay Johnson with the Panthers, another opportunity. And now we have a change at quarterback that might help his efficiency. And I've talked about him on these shows first 2 weeks of the season, but Rashad Bateman with the Baltimore Ravens also underperforming his air yard and target opportunities on the season by over 10 points to begin the year. So we'll have our full set of first true underperforming / buy low wide receivers for the week 4 slate, because we like a 3-week sample to be a little bit more confident in the usage data. But these are some of the guys that I think you can also mix in to your tournament lineups this week. With 52.50 remaining per player, you could play Tank Dell in this build, and now you're basically ready to go. You could probably massage defense a little bit more to get to one of those other underperforming wide receivers that I talked about, to get your last wide receiver in here in a tournament build with Miami and Seattle. But I actually think there's value in trying to play Akers, the cheap running back value, and Tyreek Hill as your 3-1 Seattle and Miami stack this week. Once again, we're expecting only 1% ownership for Tyreek Hill on DraftKings and FanDuel. That might come up a little bit as more people catch on to this, but I still expect him to be under 5% on the slate. So he's one of our top high-risk, low-owned plays as a result here in week number 3 of the NFL season. Miami, Seattle, one of my favorite stacks. We have Baltimore and Dallas as well. To me, I think just because of the price of the players involved, this is more of like a 2-1 stack spot. Obviously, the primary way to stack the offenses here: Lamar Jackson, quarterback, CeeDee Lamb at receiver. Bateman also underperforming his opportunities. You can definitely finish off a lineup this way. Of course, on the Baltimore side, the best receiver to consider is going to be Zay Flowers. He's got the safest projection, I would say, at receiver in this offense. You have to find a way to pay for it at $6,800 if you're also squeezing an expensive Jackson and an expensive CeeDee Lamb into your lineups. And then we have Philadelphia and New Orleans. I actually think my favorite way to do it is on the Philadelphia side. You're kind of leveraging the popular Devonta Smith play and trying to capitalize on that by building around it. I think from like a salary perspective, obviously Chris Olave here does fit at $6,300. But Rashid Shaheed, probably another play worth considering. He's scored in each of the first 2 weeks of the season, so maybe he'll be a little bit more popular than we would like here. But Olave and Shaheed at receiver, I think my favorite ways to bring back the Saints offense. Obviously, you can consider Alvin Kamara, but the price tag becomes a little bit hard to do with the other quote-unquote optimal plays the field is on this week that I have on the screen here for you. That's pretty much what I have for you for week 3 of the NFL season. Good luck in week 3 contest, and I'll be back next week to talk to you about week 4.